Hello and welcome to episode 16 of CGI Unpacked. And today we're going to talk about the Year 2 review of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act Northern Ireland 2021. And I have with me this afternoon 4 guests. I have Emma Crozier from the Department of Justice, Lindsay Fisher from PSNI and Caroline Conway from PPS, as well as the lead inspector for this Year 2 review, Claire Feehan from CGI. And you're all very welcome.
Thank you.
So just a bit of background into the Act and why we've done the review report. So the Act was commenced in February 2022 and it was really a game changer in Northern Ireland in terms of creating a domestic abuse offence for the first time and also introducing aggravators, particularly recognising the impact on children of domestic abuse and violence and also on aggravator that with an associated offence. So it meant that it brought greater powers to the judiciary in how they consider aggravating and aggravations in sentencing, and also brought to the fore a number of obligations on the department to report information about the Act and data. But importantly, the Minister of Justice asked CJI to undertake an annual review of the implementation of Part 1 of the Act, and that's why we're here today to talk about the Year 2 review. So first of all, I'm going to turn to Claire and ask Claire about her experience of undertaking the Year 2 review and what you found.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. So as you mentioned, this is sort of an ongoing process. We've been asked by the Minister of Justice to do this every year for the first 7 years. So this was the second year. And as a result, I guess we took the opportunity to sort of look at the recommendations we made in the first year and assess progress made against those. I got the opportunity as the lead inspector to go on to each of the organisations involved and speak to those tasked with delivering those recommendations. And what was clear to me and to the other inspectors involved too was that domestic abuse really is a strategic priority for each of the organisations. That's very evident to us. And we also seen some evidence of cultural change, in terms of particularly how police officers and prosecutors are sort of dealing with and understanding domestic abuse. So that was really positive. But, as with everything, there's more work to be done. Particularly, we were looking at the area of that prosecution team approach and sort of some of the work that had been taking place, but some of the areas where there's still more work to be done. The likes of specialist domestic abuse prosecutors or training in their approach to children in domestic abuse cases. So we looked at a broad range of things, but it was an interesting inspection and it was interesting to see how progress had moved forward.
So a year comes around pretty quickly, doesn't it? In terms of it felt like 5 minutes since we'd published the Year 1 review and then we were into Year 2. So Lindsay, from your perspective in the police, can you tell us a bit about what had happened in that intervening year and what you think has changed in the police, even since the time that Claire had undertaken the fieldwork for the Year 2 review?
Definitely, because as you say, the time goes really quickly. It feels like the report's out and then we're almost doing fieldwork again. But certainly in the last 12 months, really, we have undertaken lots of different training. And this is what I think was important for the inspections to highlight the blend of in-person and online training. So we have worked and focused on really making sure that the victim's voice is in training. And we've had likes of Rachel Williams come over and really deliver some significantly powerful in-person training for officers. And I think that really helps with the culture shift because we focus on language, we focus on the impact on children and young people, and actually where trauma presents for young people as well. And actually, since the fieldwork I've been working with Women's Aid Federation to look at an online children-focused platform, and I'm continuing to deliver training through our senior investigators courses as well, which I think is really important that we don't just think about domestic abuse in a report of domestic abuse, that we're actually thinking about it across all investigations, whether it's a homicide, whether it's a potential counterterrorism offences, because I think you will see elements of abuse across so many different crime types.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that came out from the report was about the lack of opportunity to carry out that face-to-face training, particularly for contact management.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's really around Thrive. And there has been a number of different trainings online, and where there's an opportunity, if somebody has been off for a period of time, then there will be training on Thrive that's delivered, and it features through other training courses as well. But in terms of face to face, because it is small team, 24/7 coverage, it's really difficult to get bespoke in-person training. But they have worked on a really thought-provoking online training, and actually we have been working with contact management in other areas of training, and particularly around the cultural shift. So there's opportunities there that I think we can continue to explore to make sure that regardless of the platform, the training is as meaningful as possible. And if that means opportunities for train the trainer, for example, then we'll explore those.
So one of the real positives coming out around the better partnership working and the Gateway pilot, Caroline, was around better working between between PPS and the police. Can you tell us a bit about how that's going and even what has happened since Claire's fieldwork?
Yes, well, the Gateway pilot has been running since late 2024. So I think we're coming up to kind of the 6 months stage. And there's been, it's been evaluated kind of throughout the pilot. And I think it's subject to kind of an evaluation at 6 months, a formal evaluation. And it's showing some really positive results in terms of early engagement, kind of file quality, and prosecutors having all that information they need to make an informed decision at the earliest stage. So we're seeing really positive progress around that pilot, and there are plans to expand that out as well. So the current focus of the pilot is on domestic abuse cases. So most of our domestic abuse cases that come from police are going through the pilot, and that involves a small cohort of prosecutors working with gatekeepers on a daily basis, making sure that those files are complete and all the questions and evidential lines of inquiry are explored.
And the PPS, do you feel there's a greater awareness and profile about domestic abuse?
Oh, certainly. Tackling domestic abuse has always been a key priority for PPS. It's been one of our big, and kind of preparing PPS for the implementation of the Act was one of our greatest kind of training pieces that has been conducted to date. And there's constant ongoing training. We will use external agencies. In the past year, we had Men's Advisory Project in. We have prosecutors completing training on the the online 8-stage domestic homicide timeline from Jane Monkton Smith that came out of one of the domestic homicide review recommendations. So there's always a great focus on that. And also within PPS, we're constantly issuing guidance on restraining orders, special measures to allow prosecutors to, personally develop themselves as well in terms of kind of reading up and keeping themselves abreast of any developments.
So what do you think the next 6 months looks like in terms of that Gateway pilot and lessons learned from that? And you know that CJI's pretty frequent at saying about, file quality and that partnership working. So how do you see that panning out?
Yes, well, there will be training. There'll be recommendations around training coming out of that. And I suppose as well, I think that kind of early indications are that because the police essentially have such a huge cohort to train, it will be that train the trainer and going in at the supervisor level. So I think that's on the agenda for the next year. And certainly for PPS and what we will be sharing with police as well, there'll be a real focus on evidence-led prosecutions and how we prepare those files and get those files right first time. And obviously I plan to be working with Lindsay as well to kind of work with police to ensure that we have the most robust case going forward.
So one of what we found from the review this year and looking at the recommendations was around the recording of DACE and DANA, so the enhanced or not enhanced sentencing, and obviously there's a role for prosecutors in court around that. So can you tell me a bit more or a bit about how does that work in a court environment, particularly when you might not always have the same regular prosecutor in a particular court? I'm thinking mostly of magistrates' courts where you don't have the same team there week on, week in, week out.
Yes, and that does present a bit of a challenge. So what we have done is issue guidance to prosecutors to reinforce that message that they have a role to play there in sentencing. But I think one of the kind of key priorities for under the Act was that these aggravators were displayed clearly on instruments of prosecution, so on summonses, on the bills of indictment, so that the court should always be aware that it is there. And we've asked prosecutors where it is unclear that where an aggravator has been proven or where the sentence has been enhanced to ask those questions. And we've also been working with court service on that as well.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to turn to you now in terms of the department and work that you've been doing on, even following the fieldwork for this review. If you can tell us a bit about that.
Sure. One of the main findings was in relation to the e-learning. And we developed the e-learning along with Women's Aid and our other voluntary sector partners when the offence went live in 2022. But the findings have been that uptake has been low, which is disappointing. But we've had some feedback that maybe the training is a bit long. So we're working with Women's Aid at the minute to develop a shortened version of that that we'll make available to all government departments, but also other sectors. Have just come from a meeting of the first meeting of the new domestic and sexual abuse strategy. They had a strategy oversight board meeting, and there was discussion there about how we could get that out to teachers and GPs and just all frontline professionals who could come into contact with a victim, and also people in their personal lives as well. You never know if there's somebody in your family or a friend who is experiencing domestic abuse. So it's really about getting that training and awareness to them so that they know how to identify domestic abuse and, importantly, how to respond or signpost. So that's one of our main things.
Thanks for that. And just in general, just open it up to everybody. I mean, we've talked about the good work that is underway, and I think the Claire's report and what we've said is very much about acknowledging what's going on. But what do you see as the challenges moving forward when we are kind of coming back? We will be doing this work, for the next sort of 5 years or so.
I think for me, it's some of the administrative tasks that we're trying to get right and trying to get into an automated format. And obviously I've spoken really openly about the ongoing work, and we're making progress around Operation Encompass, which is great to see, because everybody that's involved, whether police or teachers, are saying this is a really good safeguarding tool. This is a really good opportunity to understand what's going on for children. I think being able to put that into some kind of automated format is really going to enhance that, because there'll be a consistency in the information, but also in the speed at which it's delivered. Because as we've spoken about before, there's been over 30,000 referrals through Operation Encompass. And you can imagine that if you have a significant number in, for example, Belfast on any given day, it takes a while to deliver all of those phone calls and messages in a meaningful way. So to be able to do that at the point of origin, whenever the call is being made, is going to be a real game changer. And thankfully we are making really good progress working alongside EA on that.
Do you have any particular time scale for that? Because I know it's been raised with us as well in terms of we've been talking about this.
We're hoping that it's imminent. We've identified potential pilot schools, and we've been sort of stress testing and process testing a dummy address, for want of a better term, to make sure that it works and it goes and it sends the right information. So I'm hopeful that you certainly, whenever we're starting the new school term, that we are in a different position.
And what about for you, Caroline? What do you think sort of the next 6 to 8 months are going to look like in terms of challenges?
Well, I think one of the operational recommendations was for PPS to go back and look at the specialist prosecutor cadre. And I think kind of budgets and resources will hamper that. So we're going to explore other opportunities around kind of improving our services with the resources that we have. And also I think kind of IT is up probably an issue for us. We are waiting on kind of development work being undertaken to kind of to improve the kind of the reminders around aggravators, the domestic abuse aggravator that is on files. Now, we've issued guidance around that, but an IT solution is in the pipeline, but we have a very small development team and they've got a lot of other competing priorities. So they're trying to find time to kind of look at that. We'd hoped it would be in place now, but I'm assured it'll be kind of within the next kind of few weeks, kind of a month or two. So that, I think those kind of areas create particular challenges. But I think it's just kind of keeping on kind of delivering the training, getting prosecutors engaged, kind of keeping abreast of all the Court of Appeal judgments that are coming out, because I think they're particularly useful to prosecutors, certainly in terms of court venue. So I think that's our focus.
It's good that we are actually tagging in on the aggravators piece as well. So it had been obviously picked up in terms of police operational recommendations about identifying children, and it ties in very much with the Up and Compass piece. But we are working with Niche to get a hard mandatory check, basically, which means that if you've got the domestic abuse offence on a file, that you're asked specifically that question about children, which is going to be really, really good, because we're continuing with the training, because I think it's important in understanding the impact so that we can present the best evidence around the impact for children as well, and being victims in their own right, but actually using the provisions that are available to us as well. So that will be in by the end of this calendar year. So there's only certain times of the year that we can make those changes with our systems. But by the time you're doing field work again for this year, I would be hopeful that that we'll have that, or it'll be very imminent at that stage, which is a huge step forward for us.
And in terms of that gateway pilot and the MOU over on file building, quality of file, is that something that features in that as well, in terms of identifying where an aggravator should and could have been applied, but it maybe wasn't picked up by the police?
Oh, the Gateway team are alive to that as well. So they will feed that information back whenever there's an aggravator applied or removed. I think that's relayed at that point.
It comes out in our QA as well. So our in-depth quality assurance, we look at, it's a smaller number of files, but really looking at in-depth, and it's certainly something that we discuss as well, really looking at everything within those files.
Also, PPS in, I think it was December of last year, issued a staff's instruction on mandatory recording of decision notes in all summary domestic abuse prosecutions. So under that guidance, prosecutors have to record a detailed note about the decision they've taken and why they've potentially disagreed with some of the decisions around charging that police have taken. And hopefully then that will be kind of transferred over to the instructions to police and filtered back to the investigating officers as well through that means.
Yeah. It's probably unfair to ask you, but I'll ask you anyway, Caroline. It's even for personal knowledge, where there is that kind of she said, or he said, she said kind of scenario. What way do prosecutors kind of look at that in terms of whether to make a decision or not when you have one person's word against the other?
Well, just because there's no independent evidence doesn't mean that the evidential test will not be met. So prosecutors will look for other supporting evidence. They'll look at the defendant's history, the domestic history reports that are coming in, previous reports of abuse, and they'll try to build a picture using all that other evidence. And they'll also look at kind of signs of injury, disturbance, what's being said on body worn and what's being said in interview, and they'll use all that to kind of assess the case and apply the evidential test. So just because there's one person's word against the other does not mean that the case cannot go ahead.
I'm going to ask you potentially about DOJ plans for the next foreseeable period, and we know we've now got a new programme for government, we've got a new policing plan, safer communities, end of violence against women and girls. And while we know domestic violence and abuse covers everyone in our community, What do you think the department and the new corporate plan for the department is it likely to profile this as an ongoing priority, given that the minister was instrumental in this legislation going through?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a ministerial priority, domestic and sexual abuse. And last September, we published the new 7-year domestic and sexual abuse strategy. So that was published alongside Department of Health. But importantly, we also had a range of other departments brought in as well. So we had Department for Communities, Education, Executive Office. So it really is an important issue for Justice and other departments. And we're working very closely with the Executive Office on the EVOG strategy. As you say, the domestic and sexual abuse strategy is for all victims. And obviously the EVOG one is gendered, but there is still that crossover. But yeah, I think in the past 12 months with the publication of both strategies, we've seen its profile being raised, which is good.
And we've always, for a long time, talked about effective partnership working across government, and that justice sometimes ends up trying to deal with issues that people might have passed through other departments. So do you feel there's more of a sense of joint ownership?
Yeah, definitely, especially with the Department of Health being co-design partners being co-leads on the strategy. So the action plan associated with it has a range of actions for other departments. And we have a children and young people's pillar with a lot of actions for Department of Education as well, and communities. So yeah, it's good. So
Claire, I'm going to bring you back in now. So what is the next? When we're looking at, we've just published today, year 2, we're looking already planning for year 3. So do you have any thoughts at the minute about what that might look like, given that you'll be leading on it again?
Hence, back to me again. I know it comes around very quickly, as we've already mentioned, but here we go. So we've already had some initial discussions, I guess, to try and think about what year 3 looks like, because that's the challenge, I guess, with a requirement in legislation. This is annual reviews for 7 years. So I guess for us, the challenge is keeping that momentum and keeping things progressing. But in terms of looking forward to year 3, I think it's going back to some of the structures we put in place for year 1 and really starting to build that really solid evidence base again around police case file reviews and prosecution case file reviews, and looking sort of in depth at the operation of the legislation and how that's being implemented, including looking at the domestic abuse offence itself and those aggravators that we've already mentioned and how those are being implemented. So it'll be an important year, I think. The third year is we're sort of moving away from that narrative that says this is new and it's bedding in. It's year 3 now. So let's see how this is really playing out now and where any issues remain.
Yeah. I think it's really, and we've said it in the report, it is really encouraging the breadth and depth of work that is going on. And I think we certainly recognise that all the recommendations weren't going to be fully implemented when we got to this stage. But I think that the momentum and pace does need to be picked up. There are things that we all need to be looking at, and we're certainly looking forward to the year ahead and seeing some more of that embed in. Can I just thank you not only for coming today, but for also the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis? Claire and I are always very conscious that your role is very different on a day-to-day basis than ours. So I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing to take this forward. The legislation in the Assembly has been very clear about what they intended, and we've our part to play in doing what we've been asked to do. But the work that you do every day and the difference you make to victims is absolutely critical. So thank you for that. So hope you will listen to this, not only this podcast episode, but future podcast episodes of CJI Unpacked.